My name is Jenny, 27 years old. The rain came down like it had been sent to drown the city, hard fists against the window, bright veins of lightning splitting the night and briefly stamping my reflection onto the glass. Hollow eyes, a mouth pressed flat, a bruised yellow shadow still fading along my throat. The apartment was dark except for the thin rectangle of light in my hands. My phone, the voice memo already finished, its final beep still vibrating inside my skull as if sound could bruise bone. 27 seconds, I thought numbly. That was all it took to turn a life into a weapon. I didn't move for a long time. The ring sat on the coffee table like an accusation, catching each flash of lightning and throwing it back at me as a splinter of white fire. I remembered the first night it glittered on my finger. Warm laughter, his palm at my waist, the world shrunk to a rooftop with string lights and the Hudson breathing below. I'd believed in that world. I'd arranged my whole heart around it like furniture in a room, convinced it would hold. Pathetic, he'd said on the memo, casual as weather. She's turned herself into this perfect little housewife who never disagrees. He'd laughed softly then, a sound I used to melt for. And to Meredith, his sister, he'd said he didn't know how to let me down easy. I could taste the coppery aftershock of those words at the back of my tongue. I set the phone down carefully, as if dropping it would make the night explode. In the pause between thunder and rain, the apartment ticked with quiet domestic sounds, the fridge humming its indifferent hum, the heater knocking like a polite guest at a locked door, the stray breath of wind fingering the gap in the window frame. Every object around me felt both familiar and hostile. The curated bookshelf, the blanket we'd fought over, the mug with the chipped rim he said I should throw away because it looked sloppy. I used to love this space. Now it felt curated for someone I didn't recognize. I stood. The floor was cold beneath my feet. A smear of light from a passing car laid a silvery path across the rug, and I followed it to the hall mirror. The woman there looked like me if you squinted. Same dark hair, same mouth, but arranged differently, like a collage that forgot the original image. I raised my hand and watched her do it too, the way she hesitated before touching the glass, as if she might shatter. "You did this," I said to her softly, and I didn't mean the memo. I meant the months of apologizing when I hadn't been wrong, the careful list to avoid buying the wrong coffee, the dresses I changed out of because he didn't like the color against my skin, the way I'd learned his weather and adjusted my tides accordingly. Lightning rolled again, this time slower, as if savoring the distance between spark and sound. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and then dissolved. I returned to the couch and sat cross-legged, the ring a neat circle of glassy ice between my knees. I reached for my phone and listened again, because pain can be an addiction and clarity a drug, and each word carved a cleaner line. I can't respect someone who won't stand up for themselves. The irony of it was a bitter joke. He had spent months teaching me not to stand. The anger, when it came, was not theatrical. It was cold, a steady river beneath ice, pushing. It carried none of the panicky heat of earlier fights, no rush to explain, no plea to make him understand. It did not need permission. It simply existed, as factual as the thunder. It said, "A story has been told about you, and it is wrong. Rewrite it." I put the ring back on the table with a soft click. The laptop waited on the credenza, screen sleeping, lid like a closed eye. When I opened it, the room brightened to a colder blue. My fingers hovered above the keys, trembling once, twice, and then stilled. There are responses that explode, and there are responses that erode. Tonight, I would begin the second kind. The first email I drafted 3 times before I let it survive. It was addressed to Catherine Walsh, his direct supervisor, a woman whose firm's website framed her with a charity 5K medal and 2 daughters wearing purple bows. I kept my sentences clean, my punctuation cool. I used words like pattern, escalation, documentation. I did not call him a monster. Monsters are imaginary. Blake's choices were not. I attached a single photograph. My wrist after the first time, 5 dusky planets orbiting bone. No angles that could be argued, no drama to be dismissed. Just skin and evidence. I read the email out loud. My voice sounded distant, like it came through a wall. I pressed send. The second went to HR, the third to a client he adored, a family foundation whose glossy mission statements about protecting women and children had become Blake's favorite small talk. I adapted the template each time, changing a word here, a cadence there, the way you adjust your tone for different rooms. Each message was a precise tap at the same pillar, not enough to topple a temple, but enough to make the marble remember it could crack. I paused to breathe. Outside, the rain slackened into a steady hiss. In the kitchen, the clock over the stove clicked to 9:07, then 9:08. I thought of him asleep now, or still at Murphy's with colleagues, telling a story with that easy warmth he'd once saved for me. There was a time when I would have wanted him to walk in the door and choose me, to say he was sorry and mean it with his whole body. That time had ended with a beep at the end of a voice memo. I opened a new document. It was not an email, it was a ledger of sorts. Columns for names, coworkers, clients, the trainer. He bragged about impressing at the gym, the couple from his building who invited us to wine tastings, his mother, his father, Meredith. I was not planning to torch the world indiscriminately. Even war can be clean. But I needed a map. I needed to know who believed in Blake because of who he pretended to be, and who might listen to me because they'd felt the wobble in his mask. My phone buzzed, and my body went cold. For a second, I thought he'd somehow known, that my keystrokes had rung in his bones. But it was just a calendar notification, a reminder to pick up dry cleaning in the morning. I stared at the words until they blurred. The mundanity was obscene. Somewhere between thunder and dryer lint, my life had split. I closed the reminder and opened his LinkedIn. The banner photo, a city skyline at sunrise, felt like an inside joke I no longer got. His latest post was 2 days old, an article about ethical investing, captioned with a fist bump emoji. Commenters praised his integrity, his leadership. I scrolled through faces that smiled back at him, and a strange grief passed through me. Not for the man I loved, but for the story I'd told myself about him, the sleek narrative I'd defended to my friends, to my sister, to myself. My hands moved again. This time, I updated my own profiles with a surgical calm, a new headshot, a new bio that did not mention fiancés or future homes, a status set to taking space, choosing peace. I did not name him. I did not need to. The truth is often louder in the blank spaces. A memory rose, the kind that arrives when you're teetering between versions of yourself. College, a debate I'd stayed late for, the room buzzing, me on my feet at the end, heart galloping as I said the thing no one wanted to say. Blake had watched from the doorway that night, grin bright, eyes lit like I was made of fire. "You terrify me," he'd said afterward, and he'd meant it as a compliment. Somewhere along the way, he learned how to turn that compliment into a cage. The apartment sighed, settling. The heater clunked on. I made tea I wouldn't drink, just to have something warm to hold. When my phone finally lit with his name, my breath did not jump. I let it ring into the dark until his voice poured out, confused, coaxing, just a hint of irritation threaded through concern. He wanted me to be reachable. He needed me to be reachable. I deleted the voicemail and set the phone face down. On the glass of the black screen, a ghost me stared up, faint and watchful. I wrote one more email, this one to myself. The subject line, what happened? The body, dates, scenes, the order of small erasures, the laughter that tasted like approval, the first time I flinched, the first time I lied to a friend. I recorded it not to convince anyone else, but to refuse my own future self the mercy of forgetfulness. I would not let myself sand the edges. I would not reframe his hands as stress. The truth would live in ink where he could not rearrange it. By the time I closed the laptop, the thunder had wandered downriver. The rain thinned to a soft brushing, 1,000 tiny fingertips against glass. My tea had gone cold. I lifted the ring and held it up to the window. In the faint streetlight, it looked like a drop of frozen rain. A beautiful lie, I said, because it helped to name things accurately. I set it back down, this time not centered on the table, but nudged a little off, imperfect, on purpose. I stood again, stretched until my spine popped, and walked to the bedroom. He would come home late, drunk draped in that smell of effort and whiskey, and he would sleep like the innocent dew. In the morning, I would rise before him. I would take what was mine and leave what was his. I would not write a note. There are goodbyes that clarify. There are goodbyes that indict. This one would do both without a single word. In the doorway, I paused and looked back. The apartment was messy with our life. Books fanned on the coffee table, a jacket slung over a chair, a dish towel curled like a sleeping animal near the sink. Ordinary chaos. I tried to superimpose the earlier image, the future we'd promised ourselves. Sunday light and grocery lists and laughing at nothing. The two pictures didn't line up anymore. They refused to blend. Somewhere in the misalignment, I found my center. I turned off the last light. In the dark, the laptop's tiny charging dot glowed red, a stern and patient eye. I thought of the emails humming their way through wires, the way a single sentence can land like a match in dry grass. I thought of Catherine Walsh reading my name and straightening in her chair. I thought of Meredith, somewhere in Boston, phone cooling in her palm after another late-night call from her brother. I thought of the girl I used to be, reckless with certainty, and felt her step closer, not a ghost, not a memory, but a co-conspirator. Tomorrow, I whispered into the quiet room, not a promise, not a threat, but a decision. Then I lay down beside a man who did not know he had already lost me, and I let the rain finish saying what it needed to say. 6 months before the storm and the voice memo, before the bruises that told the truth better than his apologies ever could, I thought I was walking into a fairy tale, the kind of life people envy in photographs. Floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors that caught the sunlight like a polished stage, a man who said I was his everything. "You're going to love this place," Blake whispered against my hair, his arm snug around my waist as we stepped into the apartment on Riverside Drive for the first time. Morning poured through the glass and painted the walls gold. The Hudson lay out in front of us, wide and glimmering, a ribbon of light unspooling into the horizon. For a moment, I let myself believe it was a horizon meant for us. I leaned into him, into the sandalwood of his cologne, the warmth of his hand at my hip. After 3 years of long-distance calls that always ended with aching silence, of weekends stolen between airports, of countdowns scribbled into planners and calendars, we were finally here. Same city, same home, same dream. "It's perfect," I murmured, because it was. The kitchen gleamed with granite counters, the kind I used to circle in catalogs I couldn't afford. The bedroom looked like something out of a hotel brochure, with a view so wide it made me dizzy. Blake spun me into the middle of the living room. His green eyes lit up like he'd invented the whole idea of happiness. "Perfect," he said, kissing my forehead, "for my perfect girl." My heart swelled. I laughed, though it caught in my throat. That morning, I believed in him like scripture. The first month was a dream stitched together from movie reels. Blake brought me coffee in bed, messy-haired and boyish, whispering good morning, like it was a secret. We cooked together, flour dusting his forearms as he taught me his grandmother's pasta sauce, our laughter fogging the kitchen windows. We curled into each other on the couch until sleep took us mid-movie, his jacket always ending up over my shoulders when I stirred. "I love you, Jenny," he'd say into my hair in those hushed moments before dawn. And I believed him. I wanted to. But fairy tales never last long without shadows. It started with a dress. Yellow, speckled with tiny white flowers, a dress I'd loved since college. We were going to dinner at Meridian, a restaurant where the menus looked more like art pieces than lists of food. I twirled once in front of the mirror, smiling before stepping into the living room. "You're wearing that?" Blake asked. His voice was smooth, but the pause afterward made me freeze. I frowned at the dress. "What's wrong with it?" "Nothing," he said quickly, but his eyes stayed on me like they were measuring something I couldn't see. "It's just, Meridian's a bit formal. Maybe something more sophisticated?" I changed into a black cocktail dress, one I didn't particularly like, the neckline too stiff, the fabric heavy. When I walked out, his face lit up. He kissed me, approval dripping sweet as honey. "There's my beautiful fiancé." The words still made me melt. That was the problem. 2 weeks later, he proposed on the rooftop under a canopy of stars. The ring was simple, classic, catching light and splintering it into rainbows against the dark. My yes came easy. Too easy. That night, I pressed my face into his chest and felt his heartbeat thunder against my cheek, For a moment, I imagined we were eternal. But the subtle changes came fast after that. At dinner, Blake ordered for both of us without asking. I tried to joke about it later, but he only laughed and squeezed my hand. You always take forever to decide. I know what you like. He ordered salmon. I hated salmon. I ate it anyway. A week later, he stared at my hair for a long moment before saying, maybe you should grow it out. It was prettier before. When I cut it shorter instead, he said, too drastic, don't you think? My makeup was too heavy for day, then too bare for night. Nothing seemed to fit the version of me he saw. I told myself it was love disguised as concern. That's what made it easy to swallow. That's what made the poison taste like wine. The first time his voice rose, it shocked me. $200 at Target, Jenny? His face was flushed, eyes sharp on the credit card bill. What the hell did you even buy? Groceries, towels? My voice came out small. We already have towels. We don't need to waste money on things we don't need. He threw the paper onto the counter, the sound sharp enough to make me flinch. I'm sorry, I whispered. The words fell out before I knew I was speaking. That's the problem. His voice softened. He reached for my hands, thumbs tracing lazy circles. You don't think about how these things affect us, affect our future. I'm not mad at you, baby. Just stressed. You understand. And I nodded, because I did, or thought I did. The next time I used my own account for groceries. He still found something wrong. Wrong brand of bread, wrong ripeness of bananas, wrong coffee, wrong me. You're not even trying, he snapped one night, throwing the cheese I'd bought back into the fridge. I am trying, I whispered, so quietly I wasn't sure if it was for him or me. He softened instantly, pulling me into his arms. Hey, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. I love you. And I whispered it back because I wanted to believe it. But the truth is, fairy tales rot from the inside. They wear a smile until it cracks. At dinners with friends, I became quieter. At work, I stared longer at my reflection, searching for the woman who used to speak without apology, who once made Blake laugh because she was fearless. Where had she gone? One night, my best friend Luna studied me over cocktails. You're different, she said flatly. Smaller, like you're trying to take up less space. I laughed it off, but her words stuck heavy as stones in my pocket. Was I smaller? Yes, and Blake liked me that way. The bruise came months later, but the fairy tale was already dead by then. I just hadn't buried it yet. The fairy tale had already wilted at the edges by the time the bruises arrived. What hurt most wasn't the pain, but the fact that by then I'd been trained to expect it. The criticisms multiplied, subtle at first. My clothes were too casual for a dinner with his colleagues, then too formal for a movie date. My hair was too flat, my lipstick too much. Even my laugh, once the thing that made him say I brightened a room, was too loud in public. I just want people to see what I see, Blake said once, smoothing a strand of my hair back, his green eyes steady. You're beautiful. You just sometimes don't know how to present it. I smiled like it was a gift, though it felt like a theft. I started to edit myself. My wardrobe shifted toward blacks and neutrals, clothes I didn't love, but he approved of. I learned to ask questions before ordering food, to pause before speaking in groups, to measure my laughter against his expression. The mirror became my silent judge, and the verdict was always the same, not quite right. At work, colleagues noticed the difference. You've gone quiet, one said. Did something happen? I laughed it off, blaming long hours, the grind of deadlines. The truth was harder. I had forgotten how to take up space. Luna saw it too. One night, as we clinked glasses at a bar, she leaned in, eyes sharp. Jenny, are you happy? Yes, I answered too quickly. My throat tightened. Of course. Why would you ask that? You just seem smaller lately, she said softly, as if she was afraid the words themselves might break me. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. I'm fine. But that night, I stood in front of the mirror and stared at the woman looking back, my posture hunched, my shoulders tucked. I remembered college Jenny, bold, unafraid, the girl who challenged professors and sparked debates that left rooms buzzing. I pressed my hands against the glass and whispered, "Where are you?" The silence answered back. The first bruise came on a Tuesday night. We were arguing over what? I can't even remember now. Something about dishes, or whether I'd used the right detergent. My chest burned with frustration, and I turned to leave the room. His hand shot out, clamping around my wrist. Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you, he said, his voice low, almost shaking. His fingers dug in, harder than he realized, or maybe exactly as hard as he meant. White marks flared against my skin, then bloomed into something darker. "You're hurting me," I whispered. His grip vanished as if I'd burned him. He stumbled back, eyes wide, horror flooding his face. "God, Jenny, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I would never—" His voice cracked. "I love you. You know that, right?" I nodded, because I wanted to believe it. Because the alternative, that the man I'd given 5 years of my life to had just crossed a line he could never uncross, was unbearable. He kissed my wrist where the marks had already started to purple. "It'll never happen again," he promised. I wore long sleeves that week. No one asked. The second time, he said I'd provoked him. I'd asked him gently to help with the dishes. He was scrolling his phone on the couch, ignoring me. I pushed again, maybe sharper than usual, because I was tired, because resentment had been dripping into me like water through stone. He stood abruptly, spun, and his elbow caught my ribs hard enough that I gasped. "Maybe if you didn't follow me around like a lost puppy, these things wouldn't happen," he muttered. His tone wasn't cruel. It was weary, almost sad. "I just need space sometimes, Jenny. When you crowd me, I feel suffocated." I told myself it was my fault. I should have let it go. I should have given him space. So I learned to swallow words, to end arguments before they began. I learned to carry silence like a shield. The third time, there was no excuse, no accident, no explanation that could make sense. We were arguing about the holiday party at his firm. I wanted to spend the evening with my family. He insisted his career needed my support. I pushed back for once. "It's one night, Blake. My family—" The backhand came so fast I didn't see it, only felt the explosion of heat across my face. The sound cracked the room open like thunder. For a moment, neither of us moved. My cheek throbbed, metallic with the taste of blood where my teeth had cut my lip. "You hit me," I whispered, the words strange and sharp on my tongue. His face crumpled. He dropped onto the couch, hands over his face. "I know," he choked. "I know, and I hate myself. I don't know what's wrong with me. The stress, the pressure, it's making me crazy. But this isn't me. You know this isn't me." I stood frozen, trembling. My cheek burned, my ribs still sore from before. "I don't know who you are," I whispered. "I'll get help," he promised, desperation clinging to his voice. "Therapy, anger management, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on me, please." I wanted to leave. God, I should have left. But my love was still tangled up in hope, and hope is sometimes the cruelest leash of all. "Okay," I said finally, my voice shaking. "Get help. But if it ever happens again—" "It won't," he swore, cutting me off. "I swear to you, Jenny, never again." I let him hold me, his tears hot against my hair. And in that embrace, I told myself a story. That this was the man I loved, not the one who had struck me. That the gentle Blake was the real one, and the cruel Blake was just stress. That fairy tales had rough chapters but still found their way back to happy endings. But in the mirror that night, I saw the bruise blooming on my cheek, and for the first time, I couldn't quite convince myself it was only a chapter. The night that changed everything began like any other, mundane, forgettable, one of those evenings that should have dissolved into the haze of routine. Blake had left that morning with a distracted kiss on my forehead and the promise of a late night at the office. "Big presentation tomorrow," he said, eyes on his reflection in the hallway mirror as he adjusted his tie. "The team wants one last run-through." I nodded automatically, like I always did. "I'll keep dinner warm." He gave me a brief smile. "Don't wait up." I didn't. By 8 o'clock, I'd eaten alone, the clink of utensils against my plate echoing in the silence of our apartment. By 9, the dishes were washed, counters wiped, the space tidy in a way that felt sterile rather than comforting. By 10, I sat curled on the couch with a book in my lap, chamomile tea cooling untouched on the table. The words on the page refused to stay still. My eyes kept flicking to the door, to the clock, to the phone that lay silent beside me. There had been a time when his late nights filled me with pride, ambition, dedication, success. Now they filled me with unease I couldn't quite name. At 10:47, my phone buzzed. My heart leapt. Finally, a message. Maybe a sweet check-in, a quick thinking of you. I picked it up, smiling before I even looked at the screen. It wasn't a text, it was a voice memo. For a heartbeat, warmth flooded me anyway. A voice memo meant intimacy. It meant he was walking between buildings, too busy to type, but still thinking of me. I tapped play without hesitation. "Hey, Meredith," Blake's voice said, casual, light. The world shifted. Meredith, his sister. My breath caught, but I didn't stop the recording. His tone was relaxed in a way I hadn't heard in months, warm in a way that used to be reserved for me. "So, I've been thinking about what you said last week," he continued, and the sound of traffic blurred in the background. "About Jenny." My name on his lips froze me in place. "You're right," he said. "She's not who I thought she was when I proposed. Hell, she's not who I thought she was when we moved in together." My stomach clenched. The book slid from my lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. "I mean, don't get me wrong," Blake went on. "She's sweet. She tries so hard to please me. It's almost pathetic sometimes." Pathetic. The word lodged itself in me like shrapnel. "But that's just it," he continued, oblivious to the ruin he was leaving behind. "She's pathetic, no backbone, no opinions anymore. It's like living with a ghost." A ghost. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if I could keep myself from disappearing right there. "Remember how she used to be in college?" His voice softened, almost wistful. "She was confident. She'd debate professors, argue politics at parties, call me out when I was being an ass. I loved that about her. But now, God, now she asks my permission for everything. What to wear, what to eat, what to watch on TV. She's turned herself into this perfect little housewife who never disagrees. And the worst part is..." A pause, the sound of him sighing, a long exhale of frustration. "I think I did that to her. I've been difficult. Work stress, pressure. I've taken it out on her, and she just takes it. She apologizes for everything, walks on eggshells, flinches if I move too fast. Christ, Meredith, I made her flinch." Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. "But here's the thing," Blake's voice hardened. "I can't respect someone who won't stand up for themselves. I can't love someone who's so desperate for my approval, she'll change everything about herself. It's disgusting, honestly disgusting." The memo ended with the faint sound of a door opening and voices in the distance. A soft beep, silence. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Disgusting. I sat motionless, the apartment pressing in around me. The lamp threw a pool of warm light, but I felt cold. My tea was stone cold, my body rigid. The walls felt too close, the ceiling too low. Even the air tasted different, metallic and stale. A sound rose in me then, a soundless scream that tightened my throat and clenched my jaw, but refused to come out. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking slightly, as if I could cradle the pieces of me that had just shattered. He didn't love me. He didn't even respect me. To him, I was a ghost, a pathetic shadow of who I once was. And the cruelest part was that he was right. I had become smaller, quieter, afraid. Not by accident, but by design. His design. Memories flooded me, like film reels spliced too quickly together. Me standing tall in a lecture hall, my voice sharp and sure. Me at a college party, teasing him until he laughed so hard he cried. Me asking him to dance first, fearless. That woman had been buried under months of manipulation, and he hated the version he'd created. He was planning to leave me, not because he realized he was abusive, not because he wanted to change, but because I wasn't strong enough for him anymore. He broke me, and now he was disgusted by the broken pieces. The rage that followed was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't fire, not wild and consuming. It was ice, sharp and deliberate, sliding through my veins. He had underestimated me. He thought I was weak. He thought I'd crumble if he left, beg him to stay, blame myself for not being good enough. He had no idea what he'd just created. I wiped my face with trembling hands. My tears felt like the last ones I'd shed for him. I stood, paced the room once, twice, like a predator testing the edges of its cage. Then I stopped in front of the coffee table. The engagement ring gleamed in the lamplight. A perfect diamond, a perfect lie. I slipped it off and set it beside my phone. Then I pulled my laptop toward me and opened a blank document. The cursor blinked, patient and expectant. I began to type. The first email would go out at 9 a.m. sharp, the second at noon. By evening, Blake Hernandez's name would not conjure images of success and charm. It would conjure the truth. And by the time I was done, he would finally understand. Some women don't just break. They become unbreakable. By dawn, I had already made my decision. The city outside was still asleep, rainwater clinging to sidewalks, the streets hushed in that fragile space before commuters stirred. Blake was sprawled across the bed, breathing deep and even, reeking faintly of whiskey. He hadn't noticed the ring missing from my hand. He hadn't noticed me awake all night, the glow of my laptop spilling against the walls while I mapped out his ruin. I moved quietly, careful as a thief in my own life. A suitcase lay open on the rug, half filled with clothes, neutral ones, practical ones, the things I'd need for a week away. No dresses for him to approve or reject, no lingerie he'd once bought as if it were for me, only what belonged to me. On the dresser, I placed my grandmother's jewelry box, the one object in this apartment untouched by his opinions. Its corners were worn smooth from her hands, the tiny latch a little loose. When I lifted it, I felt her presence, the reminder that women in my family had survived worse storms. Everything else stayed behind. The furniture we picked out together, the kitchen gadgets he insisted we needed, the curated decor, all of it reeked of compromise. And on the nightstand beside his sleeping body, I left the engagement ring. I didn't need a note. The diamond, sitting there abandoned, would tell him everything. I whispered one word before leaving, though I wasn't sure if it was for him or me. Goodbye. The cab ride to the hotel was a blur of neon lights and gray dawn. My suitcase thumped against the seat, the wheels rattling every time we hit a bump. I stared out the window, the cityscape shifting, and for the first time in months, I felt something that wasn't fear or shame. Clarity. The hotel was nothing like our riverside apartment. No panoramic views of the Hudson, no granite counters, no curated perfection. Just a small, clean room with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the steady pulse of traffic. To me, it looked like freedom. I set my laptop on the desk and opened it again, the plan waiting where I'd left off. Phase 1. Expose him to the people whose opinions mattered most in his world. I reread the first email to Catherine Walsh, his supervisor. The words were cool, professional, deliberate. I wasn't a scorned lover ranting into the void. I was a credible witness, documenting misconduct. I pressed send. The second went to HR. The third to the client he'd been bragging about for weeks, the family foundation that funded shelters for abused women. My hands shook slightly as I attached the photo of my wrist, bruised and purple from his grip. At the time, I had taken it for myself, a way to prove it hadn't been just stress. Now, it was evidence. With each click of send, I felt lighter. It wasn't joy, it was something colder, steadier, a sense of control returning to my bones. By noon, I'd sent 12 emails, each one angled like a blade. Not enough to look coordinated, but enough to spark whispers, enough to unravel him from the inside out. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the glowing screen. Somewhere in his pristine office, Blake's world was beginning to tilt. He didn't know it yet, but the cracks had already formed. My phone buzzed around 11:47 a.m. His name lit the screen. I let it ring out. The voicemail came seconds later, his voice strained, confused. "Jenny, what the hell? I wake up and you're gone. Your ring's on the nightstand. What are you doing? Look, I know things have been rough, but this is crazy. Just call me back, okay? We can work this out. We always do." We always do. Which meant I apologize, I shrink, I change. He forgives, we reset, and the cycle begins again. Not this time. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it again. An hour later, another call. This time, his voice was sharper, tinged with panic. "Jenny, answer the phone. People from the office are calling me, asking questions. What did you do? What did you tell them?" I stared at the phone as it buzzed, the vibration rattling against the desk like an insect desperate to escape. Then I flipped it over, screen face down. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't afraid of the man sleeping off hangovers, who lashed out and then begged forgiveness. I wasn't afraid of his charm, his charisma, his green eyes that once made me feel chosen. He'd built his power on my silence, and silence was the one thing I would never give him again. I pulled out a notepad and began sketching a web of names. His colleagues, friends, clients, family. Circles and arrows, mapping out connections. Who trusted him? Who admired him? Who could be swayed? Every empire, I reminded myself, falls from within. The hotel room smelled faintly of disinfectant, sterile but clean. A far cry from the lavender candles and curated comforts of Riverside. I preferred it. Here, the air was mine. Here, I didn't have to flinch. I opened my social media profiles and made the first move there too. I changed my status to single, swapped out profile photos, posted a single message. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. The responses came quickly. Friends who'd noticed my silence, family who'd sensed distance, even acquaintances who remembered the confident woman I used to be. Are you okay? So proud of you. About time. Each comment was a small reminder. I wasn't invisible. I hadn't vanished, no matter how much Blake wanted me to. The contrast would sting him more than anything I said directly. His curated image of perfection unraveling against the visible relief of people who cared about me. By evening, my phone buzzed constantly with texts, calls, notifications. I answered some, ignored others, always careful with my words. Not bitter, not vengeful, just strong, just free. When my sister called, her voice was tight with worry. "Jenny, what happened? You seemed so happy with him." "I thought I was," I admitted softly. "But sometimes we mistake control for love. Sometimes we don't realize how small we've become until we remember what it feels like to breathe." She was quiet for a long moment. "Did he hurt you?" I hesitated, then said carefully, "Not in ways people could see." She didn't press further, and I was grateful. The details could wait. For now, it was enough that she believed me. As night fell, the city outside buzzed with its usual chaos, taxis honking, voices rising in the street. Inside, my hotel room hummed with a different kind of energy. The first domino had fallen. Blake Hernandez, the man who thought he owned the narrative, had just lost control of it. I lay back on the stiff hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, I felt the smallest flicker of peace. Not safety, not yet, but direction. Tomorrow would bring more voicemails, more damage control, more of his fury disguised as love. But tonight, I had struck first. The morning after my first strike, I woke to a new kind of silence. Not the suffocating quiet of our riverside apartment, heavy with disapproval, but the buzzing kind, the silence before a storm when even the air waits to see which way the sky will split. My phone blinked on the nightstand with 17 missed calls, 5 voicemails, and a scatter of texts. I ignored them. Instead, I brewed bitter hotel coffee in the tiny machine by the desk and opened my laptop. My reflection in the black screen looked unfamiliar, eyes rimmed with shadows, lips drawn tight, but steadier than I remembered. Stronger. Phase 2 wasn't about emails. It was about whispers. Whispers that grew into questions. Questions that eroded reputations. I began with social media. I didn't rage or accuse. I didn't type his name. Instead, I crafted a post. Sometimes leaving isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you'll ever do. Within minutes, comments flooded in. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months wrote long messages of support. College acquaintances sent hearts and prayers. My cousin Emma replied, "You deserve better, always have." And Luna, my sharp-eyed friend, simply wrote, "About time." Every comment was a thread tugged loose from the image Blake had so carefully woven, the successful man with the devoted fiancé. Now, anyone who looked at my profile would see something else, a woman freed and a circle of people relieved by it. I answered each message carefully. Gratitude, strength, not bitterness. I wanted the contrast sharp and undeniable, my calm resilience against the silence that was already swallowing his feeds. By noon, I switched tactics. I called Marcus, his old college roommate, a man who had always seemed decent beneath Blake's charm. "Marcus, hi, it's Jenny. I wanted to let you know, Blake and I ended our engagement." A pause. "What? You two seemed—" He trailed off. "I know," I said softly. "But things weren't what they look like. He's been under a lot of pressure. He hasn't been himself." Concern etched his voice. "Different how?" "I just hope he gets the help he needs." I left it there, careful not to accuse, only to plant the seed. The next time Marcus saw Blake unravel, he'd remember this call. He'd start connecting dots. I had 3 more conversations like that, each calibrated, each designed to be remembered later when Blake inevitably tried to spin me as the hysterical ex. By afternoon, the results began to ripple. A LinkedIn post from his company celebrating values and integrity conspicuously cropped Blake out of a group photo. A small detail, but telling. I smiled into my lukewarm coffee. The storm was coming. At 3:15, my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize, but the voicemail that followed was pure Blake, confusion laced with irritation. "Jenny, people from the office are calling me. What the hell did you say? What did you do?" By 4, another call. This time I answered. "Jenny?" His voice cracked. "Thank God. Where are you? Are you okay?" I kept my tone steady. "I'm fine, Blake. Better than I've been in months." "What's going on? Why did you leave? And why are people asking me about—" He cut himself off, realizing he was revealing too much. "Asking about what?" I prompted, my voice calm, almost sweet. "You know what?" he snapped, the irritation bleeding through. "What did you tell them?" "The truth." Silence stretched, heavy and electric. I could almost hear him calculating, running through possibilities. Finally, he tried charm, the old weapon. "Come on, baby, you're upset. We've both been stressed. Don't you think you're being a little dramatic?" There it was, that word, dramatic. His favorite way to cut me down, to make my reality small enough to dismiss. I didn't flinch this time. "Am I being dramatic, Blake, or am I finally being honest?" His tone sharpened. "Jenny, we had some fights, sure, but every couple—" "You hit me." The silence that followed was longer, darker, more dangerous. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, desperate. "That was an accident. You know it was. I would never—" "Which time?" I cut in, my voice clear, steady. "When you grabbed my wrist so hard you left bruises? When your elbow accidentally caught my ribs? Or when you backhanded me across the face because I wanted to see my family instead of going to your party?" He inhaled sharply, caught between denial and fear. "Jenny, listen." "I have pictures," I lied, though my voice didn't betray it. "Time-stamped. Evidence." The silence thickened. I knew then that he believed me. The fear in his pause was louder than any denial. "Look," he tried again, scrambling. "I know I've made mistakes. The stress, it's been too much. But I love you. We can fix this. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just stop whatever you're doing. You're ruining me." "Ruining you?" My laugh was sharp, metallic. "You spent months ruining me, Blake. Shrinking me. Breaking me. Now you finally get to feel what that's like." "Jenny, please." His voice cracked again. No longer confident, no longer charming. Just a man realizing the ground beneath him was crumbling. "Goodbye, Blake." I ended the call before he could respond. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. But it wasn't fear. It was something fiercer. For the first time, I hadn't backed down. I hadn't apologized. I hadn't made myself small. The hotel room was quiet, the city's noise muffled by thick curtains. I stood there breathing hard, pulse racing, staring at my reflection in the black screen of my laptop. For the first time in years, the woman staring back didn't look like a ghost. She looked like someone with teeth. The text arrived at 6:02 p.m. A simple message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Cafe Luna on 42nd Street. 1 hour. Come alone." I stared at the screen, heart thudding. The name attached at the bottom made my blood run cold. Meredith. Blake's sister. I sat frozen in the hotel room, the hum of traffic seeping faintly through the window. Meeting her could be dangerous. Maybe she was Blake's envoy, sent to convince me to back down. Maybe she wanted to guilt me into silence. Or maybe, just maybe, she knew more than I realized. By 6:55, I was walking through the cafe doors, the bell above chiming softly. The place was crowded with the after-work rush, air thick with the scent of coffee and baked bread, voices overlapping in a steady hum. In the far corner, I saw her, Meredith, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun, hands wrapped tightly around a steaming cup. She looked up, and for the first time, I saw Blake's green eyes untainted by arrogance. "Jenny," she said, standing quickly. Her voice was thick, her eyes glassy. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the booth across from her, my posture guarded, every muscle ready. "Your brother sent you, didn't he, to try and fix this?" Her laugh was short, bitter. If Blake knew I was here, he'd never speak to me again. That caught me off guard. I studied her, searching for the trap. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected. Guilt. "I came because I owe you an apology," she whispered. A huge one. I blinked. For what? For not speaking up sooner. For not seeing what was happening to you. For encouraging him to leave you instead of telling him to get help. Her words landed like blows. So it was true. She'd been the one he confided in, the one he'd told I was pathetic. My throat tightened. "Explain," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She nodded, tears slipping free. "For months he's been calling me, complaining, saying you'd changed, that you weren't the woman he fell in love with, that you were needy, dependent, pathetic. At first, I told him relationships take work, that maybe you were just adjusting, but he kept calling, and eventually, she trailed off, shame burning her cheeks. Eventually, I told him if he was that unhappy, he should end it. My blood went cold. But then, she rushed on, I saw you at our parents' anniversary party. Do you remember? I did. Blake had criticized me the entire drive, my dress, my small talk, even the way I held my glass. By the time we arrived, I'd been silent, terrified of saying the wrong thing. You barely spoke, Meredith said, her voice trembling. And when you did, you looked at Blake like you were asking for permission. And when he snapped at you for spilling wine, the way you flinched. She pressed a napkin to her eyes. That's when I realized. You weren't just incompatible, you were afraid. I said nothing, afraid that if I opened my mouth, the dam inside me would burst. I confronted him the next day, she admitted. I told him I thought something was wrong, that maybe he was hurting you. He got furious, said I didn't understand, that you were manipulative, that you played the victim. He painted you as the problem. A chill spread down my spine. Even when faced with his sister's concern, he had twisted the story, made me into the villain. Meredith leaned forward, her voice urgent. I'm a doctor, Jenny. I see signs of abuse in patients' families all the time. The patterns are always the same, and I realized I was seeing them in you. I should have spoken up sooner. I didn't, and I'm sorry. I swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this now? Her answer was simple. Because what you're doing is right, exposing him, making sure he faces consequences. I want to help. I stared at her, suspicion and hope warring inside me. Help how? She pulled out her phone, hands shaking, and turned the screen toward me. A list of audio files filled it, each labeled with dates, each tagged with Blake's name. I've been recording our conversations for the past month, she said quietly. I'm a mandated reporter. When I suspected abuse, I knew I needed proof. These files, they show exactly who he is when no one's looking. My breath caught. You'd share them? I'd testify, she said firmly. Blake is my brother, but what he's done is unforgivable. If I stay silent, he'll do it again. To someone else. I won't let that happen. For the first time in months, my eyes filled with tears that weren't from fear or pain. Relief surged through me. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. There's something else you should know, she added, voice barely above a whisper. You weren't the first. My heart stuttered. In college, he dated a girl, Rebecca. Toward the end, she changed, became quiet, withdrawn. She broke up with him suddenly, wouldn't tell anyone why. Back then, we thought she was just being dramatic, but now I think he did the same thing to her. The room tilted. Another woman, another ghost of who she used to be. I tried to find her, Meredith said. She's disappeared, changed her name, wiped her social media, moved across the country. It's like she's hiding. Or erased, I thought grimly. I met Meredith's eyes, my voice steady for the first time. Then we stop him, together. Her jaw tightened, together. We sat in silence for a moment, two women bound by the same monster, both deciding to break the cycle. When I left the cafe, the night air felt different, sharper, charged. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Rebecca, for every woman before me, for everyone who might come after if Blake wasn't stopped. The hunt had begun, and for once, he wasn't the predator. By the time the sun slipped behind the skyline 2 days later, the web I'd cast had begun to shimmer with movement, not just the frantic kind that men make when they realize they're cornered, but the steadier, inevitable kind, threads tightening, voices multiplying, truth hardening into something with edges. I woke to a vibrating phone that crawled across the nightstand, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, emails flagged urgent, and a text from an old coworker that read only, "Are you safe?" I was. Safer than I'd been in months, and stronger. The first real sign arrived through LinkedIn, an innocuous notification that turned my stomach cold with satisfaction. Hartwell and Associates had posted photos from a team-building event. Blake usually constellated the center of those images, jaw sharp, tie perfect, that easy grin calibrated to charm. This time, a smiling semicircle of colleagues stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the caption, "Celebrating the people who embody our values." There was a gap where he should have been. The angle made it look accidental. It wasn't. An hour later, an email from Catherine Walsh landed in my inbox. She thanked me for coming forward, affirmed their zero tolerance policy, and requested additional documentation if I had any. The tone was professional, precise, and, beneath the formality, grim. I could almost see the lines etching deeper at the corners of her mouth as she read my message, imagined her glancing at the photo of her daughters on her desk, deciding what kind of leader she wanted to be. I forwarded the wrist photo again, along with a timeline and a short statement. Facts, not fury. By noon, a second email arrived, this one from the client Blake had been courting, a family foundation funding domestic violence shelters. The executive director, Dr. Sarah Martinez, wrote that they took alignment of values seriously and would be reevaluating the relationship. She thanked me for my courage. The words were polite, the consequence was not. In the quiet after I closed the laptop, my phone rang with a West Coast number. I let it fall to voicemail, then pressed play with a thumb that trembled for the first time all morning. Jenny? A soft voice, careful, as if each word might bruise. My name is Rebecca. I used to date Blake in college. Your email found me. I sat up so fast the mattress cried out beneath me. Rebecca, the one Meredith couldn't find, the girl who had learned to disappear. I called her back immediately. Thank you for trusting me, I said, before she could apologize for calling. Thank you for picking up at all. Silence ticked, then her breath steadied. I almost didn't. I've spent 8 years pretending his name was just another word. But when I read what you wrote, when I felt myself in it, her voice frayed. I was done pretending. We talked for 2 hours. Her story unspooled like mine, thread for thread. The charm that felt like weather, the criticism wrapped in care, the isolation disguised as intimacy, the moment his hand became a verdict. He'd broken her arm on a staircase and convinced an entire house of friends she'd slipped because she was clumsy after wine. He'd driven her to the ER himself, held her hand in triage, cried on cue. She left a month later and vanished into another name like a witness in a case where the defendant still roamed free. Do you think it ever stops? She asked finally, voice small and fierce at once. It stops when we make it stop, I said. And we are. After we hung up, a news alert lit my screen. A local blog, small but hungry, had posted an article. Investment firm places associate on leave amid allegations. Multiple women contact HR. No names, no libel, just enough detail for anyone who knew him to know. Just enough to make people who didn't know him ask questions. The comments were a slow drip at first, then a steady stream, then a current. My phone buzzed again. Meredith, I answered, bracing. They've suspended him, she said without preamble. Administrative leave pending an investigation. He called me furious, then terrified, then something I've never heard before. Silence, I asked. Yes, she said softly. Silence. I could picture him pacing his pristine apartment, adjusting picture frames that didn't need adjusting, rehearsing the apologies he would deliver in tones tailored for maximum absolution. But the room he counted on, the room where his charm always worked, had shifted around him. The floor didn't know his weight anymore. That evening, I met Meredith at a diner near the hospital where she worked, a place with cracked red booths and coffee that tasted like memory. She slid into the seat opposite with a manila folder and a face that had made hard decisions before. I brought transcripts, she said, voice low, of our calls. I've filed the originals with the date stamps. I opened the folder and read a line at random. His voice, easy as ever, blaming the stress, the market, my fragility, the weather, anything but his hands. There was a moment midway down the page where he laughed and said, She's become so careful it's like she's asking permission to breathe. Meredith's pen had dug through the paper there. He's made this a skill, I murmured, not to hurt her, but because naming truth is how it starts to lose you. Finding bright women and dimming them. Meredith swallowed. He learned it so well we all called it love. We split a plate of fries and made a map. Names. Departments. Quiet allies. People likely to feign shock while they scrambled to protect themselves. We talked about safety plans, too. My routes, my building's lobby cameras. The officer Detective Santos had promised would take my statement the next morning. When we parted at the curb, she hugged me like family, fiercely, awkwardly, then stepped back with a doctor's composure restored. Call me if you feel the floor tilt, she said. Even a little. I will. I didn't have to call. The floor tilted on its own the next afternoon when an unknown number with a Greenwich area code lit my screen, and a voice I recognized from holidays answered my careful hello. "Jenny," Linda Hernandez said, and the gentleness in her voice cracked my ribs in a new place. "I'm so sorry." I closed my eyes. "You don't need to." "I do," she said, firmer now. "We hired a private investigator. We needed to know if what you said, if what I suspected, was true." A breath like a door opening. "It is, and worse. There were other women, some who never filed, some who tried and were pressured into silence. There are credit lines in their names, missing balances, lies we mistook for ambition." Shame and fury braided in her words, and I understood. To lose a son to the truth is another kind of grief. "We're cutting him off," she continued. "Money, legal help, all of it. We've also started a foundation for survivors, for legal aid. It's not an apology, but it's the first right thing we could do fast." I pressed my palm flat to the desk, steadying. "Thank you," I said, because it was the only thing to say to a mother learning she had loved a stranger. After we hung up, the room felt different again. Bigger, not because the walls had moved, but because the story had. This was no longer him against me. It was him against the people who had been trained to admire him. Bosses, clients, his family, the mirror. Just before dusk, the phone rang with a number marked NYPD. Detective Maria Santos's voice was clipped and kind. "Ms. Alvarez?" she said, and hearing my last name spoken cleanly made something proud rise in me. "We've received statements from you and 2 other women. We have cause." "Cause?" "To arrest Mr. Hernandez," she said. "Assault, battery, stalking, financial fraud. We'll be executing the warrant this evening." The sky over Manhattan held its breath. Somewhere across the island, a knock would echo on a door that was used to opening. I pictured him glancing at his watch, expecting control to arrive on schedule and finding the hallway filled with a different kind of authority. 20 minutes later, Meredith texted, "They took him. No bail for now. Assets frozen." I sat down on the edge of the bed and didn't realize I was crying until a drop met my lip and salted it. Relief is strange. It doesn't shout. It dissolves. Another call came, late, with a California area code and a voice that had already become part of my spine. "It's Rebecca," she said. "I saw the article. If it goes to trial, I'll testify." "Thank you. You helped me remember my name," she whispered. "I'd like to help you keep yours." After midnight, the city softened. Taxis hissed by like subdued animals. Somewhere a couple argued under their breath and then forgave each other for something small. I stood by the window of my hotel room, forehead against the glass, and watched the lights tremble on the river. In the reflection, I caught a woman who looked familiar in a way that had nothing to do with hair or clothes. It was the set of her shoulders, the way her eyes met themselves, the absence of flinching. My phone buzzed once more. A text from a number labeled, simply home. Meredith again. "Mom asked me to share this. Whatever he writes from inside, you owe him nothing. But if you ever need us, you have family here." I typed back, "I know. Thank you for choosing the hard love." The air conditioner kicked on, a steady animal breathing in the corner. I pulled the thin hotel blanket around me and lay down in the bed that smelled like detergent and possibility. The web held, thrumming with distant footsteps and signatures, and a booking photo taken under fluorescent lights. Tomorrow there would be statements, lawyers, the choreography of justice I'd only seen in shows. Tomorrow there would be letters and apologies, and the cruel kindness of people who'd always suspected and decided not to see. Tomorrow I would meet Detective Santos with a spine made of names. Mine, Rebecca's, the others I didn't know yet, but would one day hug like sisters. Tonight, I let the quiet lay its palm over my heartbeat and keep count. The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. 3 days after Blake's arrest, the city felt different to me. Not safer, not quieter, but truer. The sky itself seemed sharper, like someone had wiped a layer of grime from the glass. Every headline, every buzz of my phone, every cautious smile from a stranger on the subway felt like evidence that the story wasn't his anymore. It was mine. When I woke in the hotel room that morning, my phone was trembling with notifications. 17 missed calls, 43 unread texts. Not from Blake this time. He was sitting in a cell, denied bail, stripped of phones and charm. These were from numbers I didn't know. Whispers had become shouts. The first voicemail I played was from Catherine Walsh. Her tone was brisk, but beneath the formality was relief. We've concluded our internal investigation. Mr. Hernandez's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. We've also forwarded our findings to the authorities. Ms. Alvarez, your courage in speaking up has given others the strength to come forward. Without you, the full scope of this would never have been uncovered. Others, plural. The next call was from Detective Santos. We've had 2 additional women file statements from, she said. Patterns are consistent. We'll be pursuing consolidated charges. I'll need you at the precinct tomorrow to review transcripts. 2 additional women. I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying my breath. My story wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was one line in a pattern Blake had been writing for years. Then came the call that stopped me cold. Is this Jenny? The voice was soft, hesitant, with a faint California lilt. Yes. This is Rebecca. I used to go by Rebecca Walsh. I was with Blake in college. A pause, a swallow. I got your message. For a moment, the world blurred. Rebecca. The ghost Meredith had mentioned. The girl who had vanished so completely it was as if she'd been erased. Thank you for calling, I said. My voice trembled, but not from fear, from recognition. She exhaled. I almost didn't. I've been hiding from his shadow for 8 years. But when I read your words, when I saw that he'd done to you what he did to me. Her breath caught. I couldn't stay silent anymore. We spoke for hours. Her story poured out like water breaking a dam. The slow drip of criticisms that wore her down, the way he'd isolated her, the sudden violence masked as accidents. Her worst memory was the night he pushed her down a staircase. Her arm had snapped against the tile, and in the ER he'd cried louder than she had. Everyone believed his story about the wine, about her clumsiness. I thought I was crazy, she whispered. I thought no one would believe me. So I left. Changed my name. Tried to disappear. You're not crazy, I told her. You're not alone, and he won't be able to hurt anyone else. When the call ended, I sat in silence, tears streaking hot down my cheeks. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Rebecca, for the others, for every woman who had been told her pain was imaginary. By afternoon, the news cycle had picked it up. A blog had run the headline, Investment Firm Fires Employee, amid domestic violence allegations. No names yet, but the subtext was clear. And then, as if the universe itself had decided to sharpen the blade, a longer piece appeared on a city site. Multiple women come forward against finance associate. Allegations include abuse, coercion, and financial exploitation. Financial exploitation. That was new. At 5 p.m., Meredith called. Her voice was tight, controlled, but beneath it, I heard the quake. Mom and Dad confronted him. They hired a private investigator, Jenny. She hesitated. It's worse than we thought. He's not just hurt women emotionally or physically. He's taken from them money, credit. He opened accounts in their names, drained balances. It's systematic. The room tilted around me. Abuse wasn't just about bruises or words. It was about making sure someone couldn't leave. They're cutting him off, Meredith continued. No more money, no legal safety net, and, her voice cracked but steadied, they've started a foundation for survivors, for shelters, in your name, in Rebecca's, in every woman's who might never be found. I pressed a trembling hand against my mouth. Gratitude and grief tangled until I couldn't tell which was which. Thank you, I whispered. That night, I sat by the window of my hotel room, watching the city lights smear across the river. The hum of traffic rose like a lullaby. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was suffocating. I felt like I was breathing air that belonged to me. And just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. A number I didn't recognize. A letter delivered through jailhouse walls, spoken aloud by a voice I once knew better than my own heartbeat. Jenny, Blake's voice began, tinny through the recording. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know, I never meant for it to go this far. I pressed play, jaw clenched, listening as he spilled apologies and explanations. Stress, pressure, love twisted into control. I'm sorry, he said. I know that means nothing now, but you saved yourself. You saved others. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." I listened twice, hunting for manipulation, for hidden hooks, but all I heard was a man finally stripped of his mask, staring at the wreckage he'd made. The letter didn't change anything. It didn't heal the bruises, didn't erase the nights I lay awake rehearsing apologies, but it gave me something I hadn't expected: closure. Because for the first time, Blake Hernandez finally told the truth about himself, about me, about the damage. And knowing that he knew, knowing that he couldn't twist the story anymore, that was enough. 6 months after the arrest, I stood in the bathroom of my new apartment, staring into a mirror that reflected someone I barely recognized, not because she was broken, but because she was whole in ways she had never been allowed to be before. My hair was shorter now, a deliberate cut that framed my face instead of hiding it. My eyes were clear, no longer darting toward the door in fear of what expression might be waiting there. The bruises had faded long ago, but the deeper wounds had taken longer. Therapy had been hard, harder than I wanted to admit. Sessions where I unraveled the knots Blake had tied into my thoughts, where I learned to separate his voice from my own. "Trauma doesn't define you," Dr. Walsh had told me once. "How you heal from it, how you use it, that's what defines you." I chose to use it. Tonight, I was preparing for the inaugural fundraiser of the Linda Hernandez Foundation for Survivors, the organization Blake's parents had built in honor of every woman he had harmed. Linda had called me personally weeks before, her voice weighted with both sorrow and conviction. "It's the least we can do, Jenny. We failed you once. We won't fail again." I slipped into a dress the color of midnight sky. It wasn't chosen for approval or to fit anyone's image, but mine. When I caught my reflection again, I smiled, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. My phone buzzed, a message from Luna. "Ready for tonight? I'm so proud of you." I typed back, "Yes, this time I'm ready to be heard." The ballroom shimmered with crystal lights and voices. Tables were draped in linen, centerpieces heavy with lilies. But what struck me most wasn't the glamour, it was the faces. Meredith stood with her parents, shoulders squared as if carrying both shame and redemption at once. Rebecca was there too, flown in from California, her hand entwined with her boyfriend's, her smile fragile but fierce. And scattered through the crowd were women I didn't know, survivors who had read my story, who had found their own voices in its echo. When it was time, I walked to the podium. My steps didn't falter, my hands didn't shake. I looked out over the sea of expectant eyes and began. "My name is Jenny Alvarez," I said, and the microphone carried my voice steady and strong. "I stand here tonight not as a victim, but as a survivor." I told them the truth, not the sanitized version, but the truth that cut and bled, about the slow erosion of confidence, about the apologies I didn't owe, about the bruises hidden under sleeves. I told them about the night a voice memo shattered my silence and forced me to remember who I was. "I could have left quietly," I said. "I could have disappeared and tried to rebuild in private, but silence protects the wrong people. Silence would have been his shield, and I refused to give him that gift." Faces blurred through tears in the audience, but I kept going. I spoke of the investigation, the trial, the other women who came forward. I spoke of the importance of believing survivors, of holding abusers accountable, of creating systems that didn't look away. "Abuse isn't always visible," I said. "It doesn't always leave scars you can photograph. Sometimes it's in the way you flinch when the door opens. Sometimes it's in the way your laughter gets quieter until it disappears. But make no mistake, it is real, and it is devastating, and it is always a choice. Blake Hernandez made that choice, and he is living with its consequences." Applause thundered, but I raised a hand, not finished. "This story isn't really about him," I continued. "It's about us. It's about what we do when we see someone shrinking in front of us. Do we look away, or do we reach out? Do we let fear dictate silence, or do we choose courage, even when it costs us?" When I finished, the room rose in a standing ovation. The sound washed over me, not as pity, but as recognition. They weren't clapping for survival alone. They were clapping for the decision to speak, to fight, to refuse silence. Afterward, as I gathered my notes, a young woman approached me. Early 20s, nervous, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights I knew too well. "Miss Alvarez," she said softly, I think I might be where you were." Her voice broke. "I keep telling myself it's not that bad, but when I heard you tonight..." She swallowed hard. It is that bad, isn't it? I put a hand on her shoulder. Yes, I said gently, and it's not your fault. You deserve better. You're not alone. I gave her numbers, resources, names of people who could help. She left clutching the information like a lifeline. And in that moment, I understood something. This was the real victory. Not Blake's downfall, not the headlines, not even the guilty plea. It was this, transforming pain into purpose, helping one more woman realize she wasn't crazy, she wasn't worthless, she wasn't alone. Later, walking out into the golden wash of city lights, I tilted my face toward the night sky. The air smelled of rain again, sharp and cleansing. I thought of the woman I had been, the one who flinched, who apologized, who believed love meant becoming smaller. She was gone. In her place stood someone unbreakable, someone unsilenceable, someone who had taken a story meant to destroy her and turned it into a weapon for justice. Blake Hernandez had thought he could erase me. Instead, he had created someone unstoppable.